In the early dawn of March 1st, 1896, the mountains of northern Ethiopia stood silent under a pale orange sky. The wind whispered across the ridges of Adwa, carrying the distant sounds of armies assembling, tens of thousands of Ethiopian warriors gathering for a battle that would echo through history. This was not merely a clash between two nations. It was the day an African kingdom would defy one of Europe's rising imperial powers. The day Ethiopia defeated Italy and forever changed the course of colonial Africa. To understand the magnitude of Adwa, we must travel back to a time when the map of Africa was being redrawn by foreign hands. The late 19th century marked the height of the so-called scramble for Africa. European powers, Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, and Italy, were racing to claim territories across the continent. Africa, rich in resources and strategically vital, became the battleground for imperial ambition. Yet among the independent states still standing, Ethiopia remained unique. A proud and ancient empire with a lineage stretching back to the time of Solomon and Sheba, Ethiopia was no stranger to foreign contact or conflict. It was a land of mountains, faith, and fierce independence, ruled by Emperor Menelik II, a leader of remarkable vision, diplomacy, and strength. Italy, meanwhile, was a young nation hungry for colonial prestige. Having unified in 1861, it sought to join the ranks of Europe's great powers. Its politicians and generals turned their eyes toward the Horn of Africa, where Italy had already established a foothold along the Red Sea coast in Eritrea, to the Italian government expanding inland toward the Ethiopian highlands promised glory and empire. But what they found instead was resistance and the unbreakable will of a people determined to remain free. The seeds of the Battle of Adwa were planted years earlier, in 1889, when Emperor Menelik II signed the Treaty of Buchalli with Italy. Written in both Amharic and Italian, the treaty was meant to formalize relations between the two nations. Yet, hidden within its language was a deception that would ignite a war. The Italian version claimed Ethiopia had agreed to become a protectorate of Italy, essentially surrendering its sovereignty. But in the Amharic version, Menelik had merely agreed to use Italy as an intermediary for foreign relations, if he so chose. When the emperor discovered this betrayal, he was outraged. Menelik rejected Italy's claim over Ethiopia, publicly renouncing the false treaty and demanding the world recognize his nation's independence. Italy responded with arrogance and arms, convinced that modern European firepower would crush any African resistance. They launched a military campaign to force Ethiopia into submission. Yet they underestimated both the terrain and the determination of Menelik's empire. By 1895, the confrontation was inevitable. Italy's colonial forces, commanded by General Oreste Baratieri, advanced from Eritrea into northern Ethiopia, capturing several frontier towns. They believed Ethiopia's armies were primitive and divided, and that Menelik would surrender once faced with modern artillery and rifles. But Menelik was not a man to bow easily. From his capital in Addis Ababa, he sent urgent calls across his vast empire. From Tigray to Shoa, from Goshen to Wallo, messengers carried his royal decree. Every able-bodied man must take up arms in defense of the motherland. The call to defend Ethiopia spread like wildfire. What followed was one of the greatest mobilizations in African history. Peasants, nobles, priests, and warriors answered their emperor's call. Menelik's forces swelled to more than 100,000 strong, a united army of diverse ethnic groups bound by one purpose: freedom. They came armed with everything from ancient spears to modern rifles purchased through clever diplomacy and trade. Menelik, aware that modern weapons could decide the war, had spent years acquiring firearms and ammunition from European suppliers. His foresight now proved invaluable. By early 1896, the Ethiopian army had encamped near the rugged hills of Adwa, in the northern province of Tigray. The terrain favored them, steep, mountainous, and difficult for the Italians to navigate. Menelik was joined by his brilliant and fearless wife, Empress Taytu Betul, a strategist and leader in her own right. She commanded her own contingent of troops and played a vital role in organizing the defense and supply lines. Alongside them stood Ras Makonnen, the father of future Emperor Haile Selassie, Ras Alila, the veteran general of countless battles, and Ras Mikhail of Wallo. It was a gathering of Ethiopia's greatest minds and bravest hearts. On the other side, General Baratieri faced growing pressure from Rome. The Italian government demanded victory. His army of roughly 17,000 troops, including Italian soldiers and colonial askari from Eritrea, was well equipped but exhausted. Supplies were running low, morale was waning, and the mountainous terrain made communication and movement difficult. Baratieri knew he was outnumbered more than 5-1, yet political pressure pushed him into a desperate gamble. He decided to strike first, hoping a surprise night attack would break the Ethiopian lines before dawn. As night fell on February 29, 1896, Italian columns began their march through the dark valleys surrounding Adwa, but the terrain betrayed them. Miscommunication, poor maps, and rugged hills caused the columns to lose contact with one another. By sunrise, instead of launching a coordinated strike, the Italians were scattered and exposed. Menelik's scouts quickly spotted the movement. The Ethiopians seized the moment. When the sun rose on March 1st, the battle began in full fury. The mountains of Adwa erupted with the thunder of gunfire and the clash of steel. Menelik's forces surged from the high ground, encircling the disoriented Italians. Waves of Ethiopian warriors descended upon them, shouting battle cries that echoed through the valleys. Church bells rang from distant hills, and priests marched with the soldiers, carrying crosses and chanting prayers. It was not just a military confrontation. It was a spiritual struggle for the soul of Ethiopia. Ras Alila's forces struck first, engaging the Italian left flank. Ras Makonnen and Ras Mikhail pressed from the right, while Empress Taytu's artillery pounded the center from the high ground. The Italian brigades fought bravely, but were overwhelmed by sheer numbers and the Ethiopians' intimate knowledge of the terrain. Ammunition began to run low, and confusion spread through Baratieri's ranks. His soldiers, isolated and surrounded, fought in pockets, retreating under relentless assault. Menelik directed his forces with precision and calm authority. His war drums thundered as he commanded each division, ensuring that the encirclement tightened. Thousands of Italian soldiers were cut down or captured. Entire battalions disintegrated under the pressure. The sun climbed higher, and by midday the outcome was clear. The Italian army was collapsing. General Baratieri himself narrowly escaped, leaving behind dead officers and thousands of prisoners. By afternoon, the fields of Adwa were littered with the remnants of a shattered army. Over 7,000 Italian soldiers lay dead, thousands more wounded or captured. Among the captives were senior officers, a humiliation that would shake Italy to its core. Ethiopian losses were heavy too, but their victory was absolute. The empire had defended its sovereignty with blood and valor. When news of the defeat reached Rome, it sent shockwaves through Europe. Italy's dream of empire had turned into a nightmare. Never before in modern history had an African army defeated a European colonial power so decisively. Newspapers across the world declared it a miracle. The Abyssinians had crushed the mighty Italians. But to Ethiopians, it was no miracle. It was justice. It was the triumph of unity, leadership, and faith over arrogance and deceit. In the aftermath of Adwa, Italy was forced to sign the Treaty of Addis Ababa, recognizing Ethiopia's full independence. Menelik II's victory secured not only his nation's freedom, but also its international legitimacy. Foreign powers rushed to establish diplomatic relations with the Ethiopian Empire. For Africa, the Battle of Adwa became a beacon of hope, a symbol that colonial domination was not inevitable. Across the continent, and even among African Americans in the United States, Ethiopia's victory inspired pride and resistance. It proved that courage and unity could stand against empire. Empress Taytu's role in the triumph did not go unnoticed. She was celebrated as a heroine, remembered for her intelligence, her command, and her unwavering resolve. Her presence on the battlefield, commanding troops and managing logistics, challenged traditional gender roles and elevated her to legendary status in Ethiopian history. Menelik and Taytu emerged not just as rulers, but as the embodiment of Ethiopia's resilience. But Adwa's significance reached far beyond Ethiopia's borders. The victory disrupted the European narrative of racial superiority that had justified colonial conquest. It challenged the ideology that claimed Europe's domination over Africa was both natural and inevitable. For Africans under colonial rule, Adwa was a spark, a reminder that freedom was possible. Leaders of later independence movements would look back on that day with reverence. From Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana to Haile Selassie himself decades later, Adwa remained a guiding light for liberation. In the years that followed, Emperor Menelik focused on modernization. He built roads, expanded trade, and introduced new technologies, determined to strengthen his empire against future threats. But he never forgot the lesson of Adwa, that Ethiopia's survival depended on unity and vigilance. The memory of the battle became a cornerstone of Ethiopian identity, celebrated every year with pride and reverence. Yet Italy's humiliation at Adwa would not be easily forgotten. 4 decades later, under Benito Mussolini's fascist regime, Italy sought revenge. In 1935, Italian forces invaded Ethiopia once again, this time armed with tanks, aircraft, and chemical weapons. Despite heroic resistance, Ethiopia fell briefly under occupation. But even then, the spirit of Adwa endured. Ethiopian patriots waged guerrilla war until liberation came in 1941. The legacy of Menelik's victory remained unbroken. To this day, the Battle of Adwa stands as one of the most defining moments in African and world history. It was not merely a military victory. It was a turning point. It shattered the myth of European invincibility and preserved one of the world's oldest civilizations from colonial rule. While much of Africa was carved up and exploited, Ethiopia stood independent, a proud reminder that freedom once defended can never truly be taken. The name Adwa became immortal, etched into Ethiopia's landscape and memory. The hills that once echoed with gunfire now rest beneath quiet skies, marked by monuments and stories passed down through generations. For historians, the Battle of Adwa remains one of the rare moments when the balance of global power shifted, however briefly, in an unexpected direction. It challenged assumptions, reshaped diplomacy, and forced the world to see an African nation not as a colony, but as a sovereign state. In the decades that followed, Adwa would continue to influence regional politics, military strategy, and identity. Its legacy lingered in diplomatic archives and oral traditions alike, a complex event remembered not only for victory, but for what it revealed about leadership, resolve, and circumstance. Menelik II's triumph did not end Ethiopia's challenges, but it ensured that its destiny would remain its own to determine. Today, the fields of Adwa stand as both a reminder and a record. The stones and ridges bear silent witness to a turning point in African history, a day when empire met its match in the highlands of Ethiopia. Time has softened the sound of battle, but the story endures, suspended between history and legend, where the past continues to speak in the quiet of the northern hills. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more historical documentaries and legendary stories from around the world.